In Florida, we have a saying: if the birds all stop singing at once, don't ask why, just leave. Because there are places where even nature knows it's time to be quiet. You can walk for miles through the pine flatwoods, across sand trails, and beneath sprawling live oaks draped in Spanish moss, believing every inch of this state was built from sea and the sun. But every now and then, you'll come upon a rise in the land where the ground crunches beneath your boots instead of giving a soft way. At first, you might think they're oyster shells scattered by the storm. You'd be wrong. Those hills were built on one shell at a time, generation after generation. Meals shared beneath the stars, ceremonies held beneath the moon, much like the ones we know today. Children laughing where mangroves now cast long shadows over quiet waters. The shells became mounds. The mounds became villages. And when time carried those people away, the hills remained, keeping their memories tucked safely beneath every weathered shell. Long before highways cut across the Everglades, long before tourists filled the beach, long before Florida became a place where palm trees lined parking lots, there lived the Calusa, masters of the water, builders of kingdoms without stone walls. They traveled the mangrove labyrinths in graceful canoes, knew every tide by heart, and built great shell mounds that still stand today, scattered like forgotten islands through southwest Florida. Many of those places are protected now. Some remain hidden. Others, perhaps they were never meant to be found again. Now, before we wander any farther into tonight's tale, I want to say something that's important. The Calusa were real people with a rich and remarkable history. Their burial places and sacred sites deserve every measure of respect. What you're about to hear isn't history. It's folklore, woven from whispers, old fishing stories, and the sort of tales folks pass along only after the sun has gone down. Because Florida always has been a place where truth and legend drift together like fog across still water. And every now and then, it's difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. People who don't know Southwest Florida imagine beaches. They picture bright umbrellas, dolphins skipping through turquoise water, little souvenir shops selling seashell necklaces that probably came from somewhere else entirely. But if you've ever pushed a small boat beyond that last marina, past the last waterfront restaurant, past the last place where your phone still catches signal, you discover another Florida altogether. Out there, the 10,000 islands don't really feel like islands. They feel alive. Mangrove tunnels twist together until daylight becomes green and uncertain. Water slides silently beneath the roots that seem to reach into another world. Every channel looks almost exactly like the last, and the tide has a way of moving landmarks just enough to make a confident navigator wonder if they've somehow turned around. Old fishermen will tell you not to trust the water, not because it'll drown you, because it will fool you. It'll convince you that you've already been somewhere when you haven't. Or worse, it'll lead you somewhere you are never looking for. I've heard stories from the crabbers who swore they found islands that vanished by morning. kayakers who insisted they paddled past the same mangrove tree 6 times in a row, hunters who have claimed they heard church bells ringing 20 miles from the nearest steeple. Most folks dismiss those stories. Heat exhaustion, too much sun, a little too much whiskey around the campfire. But every now and then, someone tells a story they refuse to laugh about. And this is one of those stories. His name was Nathan Mercer. At least, that's what the name the old newspaper used. Whether it was his real name, I honestly couldn't tell you. Some names change with telling. Others are hidden for reasons only the storytellers understand. Nathan was 34 years old, a wildlife photographer from Orlando, with the kind of patience most people spend a lifetime trying to learn. He waited 6 hours for an osprey to dive, sit perfectly still while mosquitoes treat him like a Sunday buffet, slept in tents no larger than a child's closet if it means catching that first light spilling across the untouched marshes. His photographs had been published in magazines devoted to Florida's disappearing wilderness. He wasn't chasing fame. He was chasing places. The ones that hadn't been photographed to death. The forgotten corners where the world still looked the way it might have looked thousands of years ago. When someone told him there were islands in the 10,000 islands where almost nobody ever set foot anymore, he packed his cameras before they finished the sentence. He arrived in Everglades City just after sunrise. The air already clung to his skin like a damp blanket. Pelicans drifted above the river. White ibises stalked the shoreline with slow, deliberate steps. Tour boats buzzed towards the Gulf, carrying visitors eager to see dolphins. And Nathan ignored all of them. He preferred quieter places, the kind of places that guides didn't advertise. After checking into a weathered motel, whose wooden sign leaned just enough to suggest it had survived more hurricanes than renovations, he walked towards the marina. There were several places renting boats. Bright signs, fresh paint, friendly smiles. He passed every one of them. Instead, he stopped at a tiny bait shop tucked behind an old fish house. If you weren't looking for it, you'd drive right by. Its faded sign had long since surrendered to the salt air. A single rocking chair rested on the porch. An old tabby cat slept beneath it without so much as lifting an ear. Inside the shop smelled of shrimp, sunscreen, old coffee, and cedar. The sort of smell every lifelong Floridian recognizes instantly. Behind the counter stood a man who looked as though he'd been carved from driftwood. His skin was weathered, the color of old leather. White whiskers covered most of his face, and his hands bore the thick knots of someone who spent decades hauling traps and tying lines. He looked up only briefly. "You fishing?" Nathan smiled. "Photographs," he responded. The old man grunted. "Worse." Nathan laughed. The old man didn't. "You got a boat to rent?" he said. "I got one. Good enough to reach the outer islands. It's good enough if you know where you're going." "I've got a chart." Another grunt. "So did plenty before you." Nathan assumed he found one of those colorful local characters every small Florida town seems to have. He enjoys talking to people like that. They usually knew things maps didn't. I'm looking for an old shell mound, Nathan explained. Undisturbed ones. The old man's finally set his eyes on him, long enough to make Nathan wish they hadn't. You an archaeologist? No. Treasure hunter? No. Good. Nathan smiled again. I'm only after photographs. The old man nodded slowly. Pictures don't always stay where you leave them. Nathan chuckled politely. The silence that followed made the joke feel strangely unfinished. Finally, the old man reached behind the counter and produced a folded chart. Not new. Edges softened by years of use. He spread it across the worn countertop. A thick finger traced winding channels through the maze of islands. You stay in these waters. Nathan leaned closer. What about farther south? Nathan asked. The finger stopped, then tapped a blank stretch of chart. There. Nathan frowned. Nothing's marked. Exactly. The old man folded the map without another word. Name's Ellie. Nathan. Ellie extended the chart. If the birds go quiet, he paused. Turn around. Nathan smiled. I've heard alligator stories before. This ain't about alligators. Nathan slipped the chart back into his back pocket. I appreciate the advice, he said. Ellie looked towards the open doorway where the tide was beginning to rise. Then almost reluctantly he spoke again. If you find yourself tied off to a white shell island, his voice had grown softer now. Don't stay after sunset. Nathan tilted his head. Why? The old fisherman looked past him, out towards the water, as though trying to remember something he spent years trying to forget. Because that's when... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. Nathan waited. Nothing. Finally, Ellie looked him square in the eyes. The dead don't need company. Nathan left with the boat keys in one hand and a smile he couldn't quite explain. He didn't believe in ghost stories. He believed in weather, in tides, in light, in patience. Every strange tale he'd ever heard eventually unravels into something perfectly ordinary. Fog became confusing. Moonlight became imagination. Loneliness became fear. He suspected this would be no different. Still, as he loaded his camera gear into the small skiff and untied the dock lines, he found himself glancing back towards the bait shop. Ellie was standing exactly where Nathan had left him, hands in his pocket, watching, not waving, not smiling, just watching. Nathan gave a friendly nod before easing the boat into the channel. The old fisherman never returned the gesture. Instead, he quietly removed his weathered cap and bowed his head. Not in greeting, not in a farewell, but almost like a man saying a prayer for someone who hadn't realized that they were already lost. Florida has a way of changing its face when you aren't paying attention. One moment, you're gliding across open water beneath the sky, so wide it makes you feel wonderfully small. Round pelicans skim the surface with impossible grace. Osprey wheeled overhead, their sharp cries echoing across the bay. The Gulf sparkles like someone scattered crushed diamonds over the waves. The next, the waves narrow, Mangroves begin leaning towards one another as though sharing secrets. Sunlight filters through glossy green leaves, breaking into ribbons that dance across the tide. The air grows heavier, warmer, still. Even the change in smell happens. Salt gives way to mud, wet leaves, and something older, something earthier, almost sweet, like rain falling on forgotten ground. Nathan had spent years photographing Florida's backcountry. He knew these waters better than most visitors, or so he believed. The little skiff hummed steadily as he followed Ellie's weather chart. The channels twisted through endless mangrove forests. Left, right, another left. Every turn seemed familiar. Every island looked nearly identical to the last. He checked his GPS, more out of habit than necessity. Everything matched. Mostly. Once or twice the screen hesitated. His position drifted several hundred feet before correcting itself. Nathan frowned. Cheap satellites, he muttered. He slipped the device back into his pocket. By late afternoon, the tide had begun to fall. Sandbars appeared where open water had been only hours before. Schools of mullet burst from the surface, caused by unseen predators. Snowy egrets stalked the shallows with delicate precision. Nathan stopped often. A roseate spoonbill preening beneath the mangrove. A raccoon carefully washing a blue crab before eating it. The ancient roots of a red mangrove catching the reflection of a sky turning honey-colored in the descending sun. Every photograph reminded him of why he loved places like this. Nothing hurried. Nothing pretended. Nature simply existed. And if you were patient enough, it allowed you to witness it. It happened just after 4 o'clock. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just little by little. Nathan noticed he hadn't heard a bird in several minutes. At first he paid no attention. Birds came and went. That was normal. But then he realized something else. The insects had stopped too. No mosquitoes whining around his ears. No dragonflies skimming the water. No distant croaks of herons. Even the breeze had disappeared. The mangrove stood perfectly still. Leaves that had been fluttering moments before now hung motionless, as though painted against the sky. Nathan cut the engine. Silence settled over him so completely he could hear his own heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. He waited. Nothing. No splash. No wing beat. No rustle of leaves. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like the absence of sound. And like something's listening. He remembered Ellie's words. If the birds go quiet, Nathan smiled to himself. Coincidence. Probably a hawk nearby, or perhaps a bobcat moving through the mangroves. Wildlife often fell silent when predators approached. Perfectly natural. Still, he found himself starting the engine a little sooner than he planned. The channel opened up unexpectedly into a broad lagoon. Nathan slowed the boat. He didn't remember seeing this on the chart. It wasn't especially large, perhaps 200 yards across. The water lay perfectly smooth, reflecting the sky with mirror-like precision. On the opposite shore rose something that didn't belong. At first, he thought it was a natural hill. Florida doesn't have many hills, especially not close to sea level. Curious, he lifted his binoculars. The hill gleamed white beneath the afternoon sun. Not sand, shells, millions upon them, layer upon layer, weathered smoothly by centuries of rain and wind. He lowered the binoculars. His pulse quickened. A shell mound, exactly what he'd been hoping to find. He checked the GPS. The screen showed only open water. No island. No shoreline. Just blue. Nathan frowned. He zoomed in. Still nothing. He reached for Ellie's paper chart. The lagoon was not there either. Only uninterrupted marsh. He looked back towards the island. It certainly hadn't imagined itself. There you are, he whispered, his excitement quickly replaced by any lingering unease. Unmapped archaeological sites were extraordinarily rare. If untouched, the photographs alone would be remarkable. He eased the skiff towards the shore. The first thing he noticed was how clean it looked. Not clean in an ordinary sense. Untouched. No beer cans, fishing lines, footprints in the muddy bank. No sign that anyone had landed there in years. He tied the skiff loosely to an exposed mangrove root. The tie barely moved. The rope hung almost slack. As he stepped ashore, the ground answered with a dry crunch. He looked down. Not sand, not dirt. Shells. Broken oyster shells. Conch fragments. Whelks. Clams. Thousands upon thousands of them compressed together beneath centuries of footsteps. He took another step. Crunch. Another. Crunch. The sound echoed farther than it should have, as though the hill itself repeated every footfall. Nathan smiled. The acoustics fascinated him. He lifted his camera. The shell ridge climbed nearly 30 feet above the surrounding mangroves. Live oak crowned the summit, their roots weaving through ancient shell layers. Spanish moss drifted through heavy branches like faded lace. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in pale golden shafts. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. He began photographing everything. Wide landscapes, close details, patterns formed by shells eroding from the hillside, tree roots embracing fragments of pottery half buried beneath centuries of debris. He never touched a thing, only photographed. Exactly as he promised Ellie. Halfway up the mound, he stopped. There, impressed clearly into the shell-covered ground, was a footprint. Bare, small, perhaps the size of a 10-year-old child. Nathan crouched. The edges looked crisp, fresh. He glanced towards the shoreline. No boat, no kayak, no canoe. The lagoon remained perfectly still. Maybe a family had visited earlier, although the tide should have washed away that track near the shore. These began halfway up the hill, as though someone had simply appeared. He followed them, one footprint after another, always the same size, always perfectly spaced, until they ended. No turning, no second set leading away, just gone. Nathan stood quietly. A breeze should have erased them. Rain should have softened them. Yet each print remained sharply defined. He raised his camera. Click, click, click. The shutter sound strangely was loud. And then he noticed the circles. Tiny shells. Hundreds of them. Someone had arranged them carefully into perfect rings scattered through the clearing. Some no larger than dinner plates. Others nearly 6 feet across. Each circle contained nothing in its center. No stones, no flowers, nothing. Just empty space surrounded by white shells. Nathan photographed them too. Perhaps some modern visitor had made them. Children, maybe. An art project. Still, there was something unsettling about how symmetrical they were. Every shell faced outwards. Every circle remained perfectly intact despite wind and rain. The deeper he wandered into the island, the stranger it became. No spider webs, no squirrels, no raccoons, not even ants. The forest should have been overflowing with life. Instead, it felt paused, as though every living creature had quietly stepped away moments before he arrived. Nathan checked his watch. 5:43. The sun had begun its slow descent towards the Gulf. He should think about heading back. Just one more series of photographs from the top. The summit overlooked the entire lagoon. The view stole his breath. Endless mangrove islands stretched towards the horizon, glowing ambers beneath the late afternoon light. Clouds reflected the winding creeks like ribbons of molten copper. It was one of the most beautiful landscapes Nathan had ever seen. He set up his tripod, adjusted the lens, focused carefully. The light was perfect, and he pressed the shutter. Click, click, click. Then, another sound answered from somewhere behind him. Crunch. Nathan froze. One footstep. distinct, heavy enough to shift shells beneath someone's weight. He lowered the camera slowly. Hello? And only the trees replied. He turned. No one. The clearing lay empty. The shell circles remained undisturbed. The breeze hadn't returned. He laughed nervously. Probably a branch settling. Maybe shells collapsing beneath the roots. Perfectly reasonable. He adjusted the tripod again. Another photograph. Click. Crunch. This time closer. Nathan turned faster. Still nothing. His smile faded. Anybody out there? He said. Silence. Long and uncomfortable. He waited nearly a full minute before convincing himself he'd imagined it. He packed his camera, folded the tripod, and started back down towards the boat. The walk down the hill felt longer than before. Every few steps he glanced over his shoulder, not because he'd seen anything, because he couldn't shake the feeling that someone was matching his pace. Just beyond the trees, just out of sight. He reached the shoreline. The skiff floated exactly where he left it. Relief washed over him. He untied the rope and placed one foot inside the boat. Then he heard it again. Crunch. Directly behind him. Not 50 feet away, not 20, right where he'd been standing. Nathan spun around. The shoreline was empty. The shell-covered slope stretched upward beneath the gathering shadows. No movement. No people. Nothing. And yet, the last footprint in the damp shell beside his own boot hadn't been there a moment before. It was smaller than his, bare, fresh, pointing towards the boat. Nathan climbed aboard without another photograph. As the engine sputtered to life, he looked back one final time. The island stood beneath the sky quietly, peacefully, beautifully abandoned. And he almost laughed to himself. Almost. Then, just before the boat rounded the mangroves and the island slipped from view, he could have sworn he saw someone standing beneath the largest live oak tree at the top of the shell mound. Too far away to make out. Too still to be certain. Watching. Waiting. As darkness settled over the 10,000 islands, Nathan realized something he hadn't considered until this very moment. He'd forgotten to ask Elle one important question. If no one ever tied up to it after sunset, who had left the fresh footprints? There's a saying amongst the old watermen of Southwest Florida. They tell you the sea keeps what it wants. A favorite lure, a good anchor, a wedding ring that slipped from cold fingers while pulling a net. Sometimes a boat, sometimes a man. But the old ones, the ones whose faces have been weathered by more seasons than they care to count, will lower their voices before adding one more thing. The water remembers. Not in a way you and I remember, not with our thoughts and dreams. The tide remembers every paddle that ever cut across them, every canoe that slipped silently through the mangroves, every prayer whispered over still water, every tear, every drop of blood. Water has no choice but to remember. It carries everything. Perhaps that's why some places feel older than others. Not because of what's happened there, but because nothing was ever truly forgotten. Nathan did not stop running the skiff until the white shell island had disappeared behind a maze of mangroves. Even then, he glanced over his shoulder every few moments, half expecting to see someone paddling after him. Nothing. Only the fading glow of sunset painting the channel in shades of copper and gold. He laughed quietly. You've been alone too long. The words sounded reassuring until he realized how strangely they echoed across the water. No birds answered. No insects. Only his voice, coming back softer than before. By the time the last silver of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, Nathan had found Sheltered Cove several miles away. At least, he believed it was several miles away. The GPS insisted he traveled nearly 12 miles. The paper chart suggested only 5. Neither agreed with each other. So he shut his GPS down. The cove was peaceful. Mangroves curved around like protective arms. The water barely rippled. Perfect for spending the night. Nathan dropped anchor, checked the ropes twice, and settled onto the small deck. He slept aboard boats dozens of times before. The gentle rocking usually lulled him to sleep. Tonight, though, he couldn't stop thinking about footprints. He unpacked his camera while there was still enough light to review the day's photographs. The first image looked exactly as he expected. Roseate spoonbills, mangrove reflections, the shell mound glowing beneath the afternoon sun. He smiled. These were some of the finest landscapes that he had ever taken. Then he reached the image of the footprints. He frowned. The first photograph clearly showed one set of tracks. Small, bare, fresh. The second showed 2 sets. Nathan blinked. He enlarged the image. One set led towards the center of the mound. The second appeared beside it. He didn't remember seeing those. Perhaps he simply overlooked them. He clicked the next photograph. Now there were 3. Another photograph. 4. Each image showed more footprints than the one before. Not because someone had walked through the frame afterward. The tracks appeared only in the photographs. He distinctly remembered the ground looking almost untouched, yet his camera insisted someone had been walking beside him the entire afternoon. Someone who had never appeared in front of the lens. Nathan rubbed his eyes. Digital corruption, a software glitch. He'd seen stranger things, though never quite like this. Darkness settled quickly. Florida nights have a habit of arriving all at once. One moment the sky glows lavender. The next, the world belongs to the shadows. Nathan heated a simple meal on a small camp stove. Soup from a can, crackers, a bottle of water. He found himself listening between every bite. Silence from the island had followed him. No frogs, No cicadas. No owls calling through the trees. Only the occasional creak of the boat rocking gently against the anchor line. Even the mosquitoes seemed strangely absent. He should have welcomed that. Instead, it felt wrong. Around 9 o'clock, a breeze finally stirred. Leaves whispered overhead. Nathan sighed with relief. Nature seemed to be walking again. Then he heard it. Crunch. He froze. The sound came from beneath him. Not from the shore. Not from the mangroves. From directly below the boat. Another step. Crunch. Slow. Measured. As though someone wearing bare feet had taken a careful step across the bed of dry shells. Nathan stared into the black water. Impossible. There were no shells beneath him. The depth finder had shown nearly 12 feet. Nothing could be walking there. He leaned over the side with his flashlight. The beam pierced the water. Tiny fish scattered. The anchor rope disappeared into darkness. Nothing else. No sandbar. No submerged mound. Only black water. He laughed once. A nervous little sound. Probably a fish, he thought. Then came another step. Crunch. This time to his left. Followed by another behind the boat. And then another to his right. The sound was moving in a slow circle. Always the same pace. Never hurried. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Around and around. Nathan switched off his flashlight. Sometimes darkness reveals what bright light conceals. He waited, and the footsteps continued. Patient, unhurried, like someone walking the edge of a campfire, keeping watch. An hour passed. The footsteps never stopped. Nathan checked the time. 10:13. The sound continued. 11:02. Still circling. 11:48. Exactly the same rhythm. Not faster, not slower. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Pause. He considered starting the engine and leaving, but navigating unfamiliar channels in total darkness bordered on recklessness. He'd be far more likely to strike a submerged oyster bar than escape an imaginary threat. So he stayed, telling himself again and again there had to be an explanation. Water carries sound in particular ways. Maybe another boat. Maybe waves shifting loose shells somewhere along the shell line. Maybe. Funny how often fear begins with that little word. Sometime after midnight, exhaustion finally came over him. He stretched out inside the small cabin, leaving one lantern burning. The footsteps continued outside. Their steady rhythm became almost hypnotic. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause. He drifted into uneasy sleep. The dream began gently. Nathan found himself standing on top of the white shell mound again. Only now, it wasn't abandoned. Smoke curled into the morning sky from cooking fires. Children chased one another through the village, laughing. Women wove fishing nets from palm fibers. Men shaped long wooden canoes beside the water's edge. Dogs barked. Birds filled the air. The island pulsed with life. No one seemed surprised to see him. They simply continued with their work, smiling politely as though they always belonged there. An elderly woman approached him. Her dark hair streaked with silver. Around her neck hung carved shells polished smooth by countless years of wear. She placed one cool hand against his chest. Her lips moved. She spoke words Nathan couldn't understand. Yet somehow, he knew exactly what she meant. Remember. The village vanished. He woke with a gasp, and the lantern had gone out. The cabin sat in complete darkness. And for several long seconds, he couldn't remember where he was. Then, crunch. The footsteps. Still walking. Still circling the boat. Nathan reached for his flashlight. His hand brushed something rough beside his sleeping bag. He frowned, switched on the light. Tiny white shells, dozens of them, scattered across the cabin floor. He stared in disbelief. He had swept the boat clean before leaving Everglade City. There'd been no shells inside. Now, they cover the floorboards like someone had emptied a child's bucket beside his bed. Nathan looked at the cabin door. Still locked from the inside. Windows are latched. Nothing disturbed. Only the shells. His heart was pounding. He grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside. The footsteps stopped instantly. Silence. The cove laid perfectly still beneath the sky overflowing with stars. The Milky Way stretched overhead like pale smoke. Beautiful, peaceful, empty. Nathan slowly circled the deck. Nothing. He swept the flashlight across the mangroves. Nothing. Across the water. Nothing. Then he noticed the anchor rope. It hung perfectly straight. Not drifting with the tide. Not swaying in the breeze. Perfectly vertical. As though something below him held it firmly in place. Nathan swallowed. He tugged gently. The rope didn't move. He pulled harder. Still nothing. His anchor felt impossibly heavy. Almost as though someone beneath the water had wrapped both hands around it. Watching. Waiting. He stood there for several moments before forcing himself to laugh. Enough, he said. The words sounded weak. He looked again towards the water. Something floated near the stern. A log, perhaps. He raised his flashlight, and the beam settled on the object. It wasn't a log. It was his camera bag. Nathan frowned. I couldn't be right. He turned toward the cabin. His camera bag still sat exactly where he left it. He looked back, and the floating bag was gone. Only gentle ripples remained. He slept a little after that. Every time his eyes closed, he dreamed of a shell village. Each dream lasted only moments, and each one ended the same way. The smiling faces slowly stopped their work. One by one, they turned towards him, not angry, not welcoming, simply waiting, as though expecting him to remember something he had never known. The first gray light of dawn finally crept across the water. Nathan climbed stiffly from the cabin, relieved to see morning. The birds had returned. An osprey called somewhere beyond the mangroves. A mullet splashed nearby. Life had resumed its familiar rhythm, and for the first time in hours, he felt foolish. He gathered his gear, determined to leave the strange night behind him. Then he looked down at the deck. Fine white shell dust covered the weather wood. Not scattered randomly, not blown by the wind. It formed a trail, beginning at the edge of the boat, crossing the deck, stopping directly outside the cabin where he'd been sleeping, as though someone with bare feet had climbed aboard during the night, watched him sleep, and quietly stepped back into the water before sunrise. Nathan stood motionless. The morning breeze carried the scent of salt and mangroves once more. Birdsong filled the air. Everything looked perfectly normal, yet he could not shake one terrifying thought. Whatever had walked around his boat all night hadn't been trying to get in. It already had. There are two kinds of fears. The first arrives like lightning, sudden, violent, impossible to mistake. It's the kind that sends your heart racing before your mind has the time to catch up. A rattlesnake beneath your boot. A hurricane warning when the sky is already turning black. A sharp crack from something large moving through the palmettos just beyond the reach of your flashlight. Your body knows what to do with that sort of fear. Run, hide, survive. The second kind is quieter. It settles into your thoughts like mist setting over a river. It doesn't ask you to flee. It asks you to wonder. And once you begin wondering, it never quite leaves. The second kind is far more dangerous, because curiosity has led more souls into dark places than courage ever has. Nathan should have started the engine at sunrise and pointed the bow towards the Everglades City dock. He should have returned Ellie's skiff, packed his cameras, driven home. He had enough photographs to fill a magazine spread and enough stories to entertain friends over coffee for years to come. Instead, he turned the boat around. He told himself it was because of the footprints, because camera malfunctioned. GPS unit lost signal. Shell dust could have blown aboard on night. There had to be an explanation. Perfectly ordinary ones. He had built his entire career on documenting truth. Truth required evidence. Evidence required returning. Besides, he had one question that refused to leave him alone. If those shell circles had been made by people, where had they gone? Morning light transformed the waterways. Everything that had seemed threatening beneath the moon now appeared almost cheerful. White pelicans floated on loose formations. Blue crabs scuttled across exposed oyster bars. An American crocodile slipped silently into deeper water as the skiff approached. Nathan smiled despite himself. The world looked normal again. He almost convinced himself that night had been nothing more than exhaustion mixed with too many ghost stories. Almost. The GPS took longer to find his position than usual. When it finally did, the screen blinked, recalculating, then blinked again. His location drifted nearly a half-mile inland, right through the strand of mangroves where no boat could possibly travel. Nathan frowned. He tapped the screen. The icon slid slowly back into the water, and then stopped. The compass heading spun in lazy circles. He sighed. I guess it's you and me today, he said, folded the electronic unit shut and reached for Ellie's paper chart. Paper had a comforting honesty about it. It never pretended to know more than it did. The tide was now rising. Channels that had been shallow yesterday welcomed him with deeper waters. Nathan followed familiar bends until something caught his attention. A weather wooden marker, gray with age, half hidden among the mangrove roots. It leaned so badly he almost passed without seeing it. No numbers, no navigation symbols, just 3 words carved deeply into the wood. Turn back now. Nathan slowed the skiff. The carving looked old. Very old. Not fresh enough to be a prank. The edges had softened beneath decades of salt air. He lifted his camera. Click. The shutter refused. He looked at the screen. Memory card error? He removed the card, reinserted it. The warning disappeared, and when he raised the camera again, the marker was gone. Only mangrove roots remained. Nathan stared for a long moment. He eased the boat closer. Nothing. No post. No sign. Just muddy shoreline. He rubbed the back of his neck. He needs sleep. The words felt less convincing than they had yesterday. The white shell island appeared exactly where he remembered, waiting. Brilliant beneath the late morning sun. As beautiful as ever. As silent as ever. No birds landed there. None even flew overhead. They simply curved around it, as though this air itself encouraged them elsewhere. Nathan noticed this time, and he wished he hadn't. He tied a skiff to the same mangrove root. The rope settled against the bark with a familiar creak. The sound echoed longer than it should have, almost, as if another rope had answered somewhere deeper in the tree. He climbed ashore. Crunch. The shells greeted him once again. Dry, ancient, patient. The footprints from yesterday had vanished, every one of them. The shell circles remained, perfectly arranged, not a single shell out of place. Nathan knelt beside the nearest ring. No wind could preserve this. No rain had disturbed them. It was as though someone had quietly repaired every circle before dawn. He wandered further into the island, and the trees grew thicker. Live oaks twisted together overhead until the sun became pale green. Spanish moss driftily lays between the branches like old lace curtains. The air smelt faintly of cedar and smoke. Nathan stopped. Smoke. He breathed deeply. There it was again. Wood smoke. Fresh enough that someone should have been nearby. He called out, "Hello?" Only silence answered. He followed the scent, and it led him over the crest mound, down the opposite side, and toward a clearing he was certain hadn't been there yesterday. At its center stood a single and enormous gumbo limbo tree. Its copper-colored bark peeled away in thin curls that had glowed in the filtered light. The ground beneath it was bare except for one object, a shell. Nathan had never seen one like that. It fit comfortably in his palm, smooth as polished ivory, spiraling inward with delicate ridges that shimmered almost blue beneath the sunlight. It looked impossibly clean, as though someone had placed it only moments before. He crouched beside it. Something told him not to touch it. He couldn't have an explanation why. He simply knew. Instead, he photographed it. Click, click, click. The camera worked perfectly. Satisfied, Nathan reviewed the images. The first photograph showed the shell exactly as it appeared. The second didn't. The shell was missing. Only bare ground remained. Nathan frowned. He looked up and the shell was still resting beneath the tree. He looked back at the camera. Gone. Third photograph. Still gone. Fourth. Gone. His pulse quickened. He slowly lowered the camera. Then he bent forward until his face hovered only inches above the shell. It cast a shadow. It reflected light. It was undoubtedly real. Yet, every photograph insisted otherwise. A cool breeze drifted through the clearing. The first breeze he's felt since stepping ashore. With it came voices. So faint he almost mistook them for the leaves rustling overhead. Whispers. Too distant to understand. Nathan turned slowly. No one. The whispers continued. Not from one direction, from all directions. Like a conversation taking place just beyond hearing. He held his breath. The words grew clearer. Not English, not Spanish. A language he had never heard. Gentle, melodic, sad. He felt no threat in those voices, only longing. The kind of longing by old songs remembered long after the singers have gone. The camera hanging from his shoulder clicked by itself. Nathan jerked. Another click. Then another. The shutter fired in rapid succession. Click, 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 click. Without his fingers touching the button. He grabbed the camera. The screen flashed image after image. Dozens of photographs. all taken automatically. He stared. Every picture showed the same clearing, the same tree, the same empty background. Except things started changing. In the first image, nothing. The second, a figure stood between two distant oaks, barely visible. The third, two figures. The fourth, five. Each photograph placed them closer, never moving between frames, simply appearing, standing perfectly still, watching the camera, watching him. Nathan slowly raised his eyes from the screen. The clearing remained empty. No figures, no movement, only the gumbo limbo tree. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked back down. The latest photograph had just appeared, and now there were 12 people. Men, women, children. None smiled. They simply watched. Dressed in woven garments unlike anything modern. Their outlines soft, not transparent, not ghostly, simply out of place. Nathan whispered, "No." The shutter clicked again, and he looked. The figures had moved. Only one step closer. The whispering stopped, not gradually, instantly. Silence rushed into the clearing. Nathan became aware of another sound, water dripping, except there was no water nearby. Drip, drip, drip. He turned towards the gumbo limbo tree. Tiny droplets fell from its branches. Not rain. Clear water. Each drop landed upon the shell beneath the tree, yet the shell remained perfectly dry. The light changed. Nathan glanced upward. Clouds had rolled across the sun with impossible speed. The clearing dimmed into gray twilight, though his watch read barely noon. Fog began slipping between the trees, thin at first, then thicker. It moved against the breeze, flowing uphill. Nathan had seen coastal fog before, but never like this. It didn't drift. It searched, wrapping itself around trunks, sliding silently through the shell circles, filling every empty space. He backed away, one careful step and then the other. The camera clicked again. Nathan did not look. He couldn't. Something deep inside him whispered that if he looked now, he would see the figure standing where the fog had been only moments before. He turned and hurried towards the shoreline. The forest seemed different. The path he followed had disappeared. Live oaks stood where open ground should have been. Shell circles appeared between trees he didn't remember passing. Every direction looked familiar, but every direction looked wrong. His breath grew ragged. He stopped, closed his eyes, and listened. Somewhere, very far away, came the faint sputter of an outboard engine. His boat. He followed the sound. The shoreline finally emerged from the fog. Nathan nearly laughed with relief. The skiff still floated where he had left it. He stumbled aboard, untied the rope with trembling hands, and started the engine. Nothing. He tried again. The motor caught once, died, again. Nothing. He looked down. The fuel gauge rested on empty. Impossible. He had filled the tank yesterday, more than enough for several days on the water. Nathan unscrewed the cap, and the tank was dry. Not leaking, not damaged. Simply empty. Behind him, single footsteps echoed across the shells. Crunch. Nathan froze. Crunch. Slow, measured, descending the shell mound towards the shoreline. He did not turn around. Every instinct begged him to look. Instead, he gripped the starter cord with both hands and pulled. The engine roared to life. At that exact moment, the footsteps stopped. Nathan shoved the throttle forward. The skiff surged into the canal. Only when the island had begun to disappear behind the mangroves did he finally gather the courage to look back. The shoreline was empty. No one stood beneath the trees. No one watched from the shell mound. Yet, the camera resting beside his feet clicked one last time. Nathan looked down, against every ounce of common sense. He opened the image, and it showed the island exactly as it looked now. The skiff already pulling away, the shoreline already shrinking into the distance. But standing where his boat had been tied only seconds before was a man. Weathered skin, white whiskers, hands tucked into his pockets, looking directly into the camera. It was Ellie. Only he wasn't wearing the same clothes Nathan had seen yesterday. This shirt was old, threadbare. His straw hat was missing, and behind him, half hidden in the trees, stood dozens of silent figures, waiting. Nathan slammed the camera shut. He would later swear that when he looked back at the island with his own eyes, there had been no one there at all. There are places where getting lost is simply an inconvenience. A wrong turn down a dirt road, a trail that fades behind fallen leaves, a forgotten exit on a long highway. Eventually, you find your bearings. You retrace your steps and laugh about it later. But water is different. Water has no footprints, no broken branches, no worn paths to guide you home. It changes every hour with the tide, smoothing away every sign that another soul had ever passed by that way. Perhaps that's why so many old fishermen name their boats. Not because they expect someone else to recognize them, but because they hope the water might. As though speaking a name aloud gives the tide something to remember, and perhaps something to return. Nathan pushed the skiff harder than he had before. The little outboard protested, rattling against the transform as the bow slapped across the chop. Mangrove islands blurred together. He didn't care about the photographs anymore. He didn't care about the rare birds or untouched shell mounds. He wanted one thing: the marina, the bait shop, a paved road, anything that belonged to the ordinary world. Behind him, the white shell island disappeared beneath a curtain of fog. He didn't look back again. The paper chart laid open beside the wheel. Twice he checked his course. 3 times he corrected it, yet every channel seemed unfamiliar. He rounded a bend marked by dead cypress. 5 minutes later, he rounded the same dead cypress. He frowned. Impossible. He turned sharply east. At least he believed it was east. The compass needle spun lazily before settling somewhere between north and nowhere at all. Nathan tapped the glass. The needle quivered, then began circling again. No, his voice sounded louder than the engine. No, that's not happening. He reached for his phone. No signal. He expected that. He opened the GPS anyways, and a little blue dot blinked once, twice, and then multiplied. 3 identical blue dots appeared on the screen, each showing him in a different location. Each moved independently. Nathan stared. 1 dot drifted into the open Gulf water. Another wandered inland through dense mangroves. The third remained exactly where he sat. After several seconds, all 3 disappeared and the screen went blank. The engine sputtered. Nathan's stomach tightened. The fuel gauge had climbed back into half a tank, and he blinked. Just moments ago, it read empty. He looked into the portable fuel tank. Gasoline sloshed against the side, enough for hours. He couldn't explain it. He wasn't sure he wanted to. The afternoon sun should have been high overhead. Instead, it hung low on the horizon, golden, heavy, like evening. Nathan checked his watch. 1:17 p.m. He looked at the sky. The light insisted it was nearly sunset. His watch insisted it was lunchtime. Neither seemed willing to compromise. Then he saw another boat. Relief washed over him so suddenly he laughed aloud. An old flat boat drifted by quietly near the mouth of a creek. A man stood at the stern, casting a fishing line with practiced ease. Nathan waved both arms. "Hey!" The fisherman didn't respond. Nathan steered closer. "Excuse me." Still nothing. The man continued casting. His movements were slow, almost graceful. Nathan eased within 20 yards. Something about the fisherman felt familiar. The broad shoulders, the faded blue shirt, the weathered straw hat. Nathan's smile faded. "Ellie?" The fisherman paused. Very slowly, he turned. His face wasn't Ellie's. It wasn't anyone. Where features should have been, there was only smooth, sun-darkened skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only the shape of a face. The figure lifted one hand, not to wave, to point. Behind Nathan. Nathan whipped around. Nothing. Only open water. When he looked back, the flat boat was gone. No wake. No engine noise. No fisherman. Just empty water sparkling beneath the afternoon sun that still looked suspiciously like dust. His breath came faster now. Every shadow seemed to move. Every bend in a channel felt familiar. Too familiar. He passed the same leaning mangroves 3 times. The same offspring nest twice. A floating log shaped like an alligator drifted past, then drifted past again, against current. Nathan stopped trying to make sense of it. The fog returned without warning, not rolling across the water, but rising from it. Thin tendrils curled upwards like fingers reaching from beneath the surface. Within minutes, the island had vanished. The world shrank to 50 feet in every direction. Engine noise sounded muffled. Even the slap of water against the hull seemed slightly different. Nathan reduced speed. He could barely see the bow. Then came the voices, not whispering this time, singing. Soft, low. The melody rose and fell with the rhythm of the tide. Beautiful, ancient, heartbreak wrapped in harmony. Nathan couldn't understand the words. He didn't need to. Every note carried the ache of remembering something precious that could never be reclaimed. His eyes unexpectedly filled with tears. He thought of his late grandfather teaching him to fish, his first camera, his mother laughing on the beach when he was 6 years old. Memories he almost forgotten. The song gathered them gently, one by one. The boat slowed. Nathan hadn't touched the throttle. He drifted on its own, and the singing grew louder. Shapes emerged through the fogs, not islands, canoes. Long wooden canoes gliding silently across the water. 1, then 3, then dozens. Men paddled without a sound. Women sat beside woven baskets. Children peered curiously over the gunwales. No one looked frightened. No one looked surprised to see him. They simply traveled together, as though following a route they'd known all their lives. The canoes passed within a few feet of Nathan's skiff, yet the water never rippled. Paddles entered the surface without making a splash. The boats cast no reflections. Nathan reached for his camera. His fingers stopped halfway. Some instinct whispered, "Don't." Not everything wishes to be captured. He lowered his hand for reasons he would never fully understand. But that felt important. Respect. The procession continued, one canoe after another, disappearing into the fog behind him. The singing stopped instantly. The fog lifted. Bright afternoon sunlight poured across the water. Nathan blinked. The canoes were gone, and his watch now read 1:19. He had only lost 2 minutes, but it felt like hours. Ahead, a familiar shape appeared. A weathered dock, a faded sign, an orange tabby cat sleeping beneath a rocking chair. Nathan nearly shouted with relief. The bait shop. He made it. He tied the skiff so quickly he nearly dropped the rope into the water. His legs felt weak climbing onto the deck, and the screen door creaked as he pushed inside. The shop smelled of shrimp, old coffee, cedar, exactly as it was before. "Ellie," he said. No answer. "Ellie." Silence. The store was empty. Dust floated lazily through the beam of light. Nathan noticed something odd. The coffee pot sat cold. Cobwebs stretched across the corner of the counter, and a calendar hung on a crooked wall. Its pages yellowed with age. He stepped closer. The year printed across the top made his blood run cold. 1989. 28 years ago. Nathan stared. Impossible. He backed towards the door. Outside, the dock looked older somehow. The paint had peeled away, the pilings leaning at strange angles. The rocking chair rested on its side, one roner broken clean through. Even the cat was gone. Only a shallow depression remained beneath the porch where it had once slept. Something crackled behind him. An old radio sitting on a shelf. Its power cord wasn't plugged in. Static hissed through the speaker. Then, a man's voice. Still no sign of local fisherman Eli Cooper, missing now for 6 days after failing to return from 10,000 islands. Nathan's heart stopped. The announcer continued. Coast Guard officials have suspended active search efforts. The radio dissolved back into static. Nathan whispered, Eli. His knees grew very weak. A floorboard creaked upstairs. Slowly, deliberately. Someone was rocking across the floor. One measured footstep, then another. Nathan stared towards the ceiling. The footsteps directly stopped overhead. Dust drifted down between the old boards. He should have run. Instead, he looked up. A single shell. Small. White. Perfectly smooth. Rolled across the crack in the floor above. Then another. Then another. Until tiny shells trickled down through the gaps, landing softly at his feet. Not falling. Arriving. As though someone upstairs had opened careful hands and let them go. Nathan backed out of the shop without taking his eyes off the ceiling. A screen door slammed behind him. The sound echoed across the quiet marina. When he turned towards the dock, everything had changed again. Fresh paint, rocking chair upright, the orange cat lifting its head lazily. And standing beside Nathan's skiff, hands tucked into his pockets, was Eli. He looked exactly as he had the morning before, as though no time had passed at all. He studied Nathan for a long moment before speaking. I wondered if he'd come back. Nathan could barely find his voice. I just saw. Eli raised one weather hand. I know what you saw. You've been dead, Nathan said. Eli's expression never changed. No. A long pause. But I've been lost. The old man glanced towards the water, where the tide was quietly beginning to rise. Then he said something Nathan would remember for the rest of his life. The islands don't always take your body first. He looked back at Nathan, his pale blue eyes heavy with sadness that seemed older than memory itself. Sometimes, he said softly, they begin with your name. There are things the old folks along the Gulf Coast simply do not ask. They don't ask why seasoned fishermen suddenly sell his boat after 40 years on the water. They don't ask why an empty dock stays empty, even when other slips at the marina are full. And they certainly don't ask why someone's names are spoken only in whispers, while others are never spoken at all. Not because they're hiding secrets, because some secrets are already listening. Nathan stood frozen on the dock. The late afternoon breeze had returned, carrying the smell of salt and mangrove blossoms. Somewhere across the river, a gull cried. It was the first ordinary sound he trusted in nearly 2 days. Yet nothing about Eli felt ordinary anymore. The old fisherman looked exactly as he had before. Same faded work shirt, same callous hands, same tired blue eyes. But now, Nathan noticed something he shouldn't have seen the day he met. The skin around Eli's eyes were merely lined with age. They carried the look of someone who hadn't slept peacefully in years. You said, Nathan began carefully, you've been lost? Eli nodded once. I have. But you're standing right here. For now. Nathan waited. The old man walked to the edge of the dock and stared across the water. The island let me leave. He spoke so quietly, Nathan almost missed it. They just never let all of me come home. For a long while, neither man spoke. The tide slapped gently against the piling. A mullet jumped. Life continued around them as nothing extraordinary had happened. Finally, Nathan asked the question that had been burning in his mind since dawn. What is the island? Eli smiled sadly. The wrong question. Nathan frowned. A right question is. He looked over his shoulder towards the distant maze of mangroves. When is that island? Nathan felt a chill despite the Florida heat. What does that mean? Eli rested both hands on a weather railing. My grandfather told me something when I was about your age. He paused. I laughed at him. So did my father. Then my son laughed at me. He swallowed hard. None of us laugh anymore. The shell mound isn't haunted. Nathan blinked. What? It isn't haunted. Eli turned towards him. Folks always jump straight to ghosts. He shook his head. Ghosts are memories. What lives out there? He searched for the words. Isn't dead. Nathan felt his stomach tighten. What did I see then? You saw a place that never finished becoming the past. The sentence settled over the dock like morning fog. Nathan's mouth opened and closed again. Eli continued. You've probably heard people say that history leaves its mark. Nathan nodded. Most places, Eli said, history passes through. He tapped the dock with one boot, but every now and then, another tap. History gets stuck. The old fisherman looked towards the western sky. When I was 19, my brother and I found that island. Nathan listened without interrupting. It wasn't on our chart either. We thought we discovered something nobody else had. He laughed softly. We were young enough to believe every mystery existed for us to solve. We camped there. For one night. At least, that's what we thought. My brother woke me up just before dawn. He kept saying someone is singing. I couldn't hear a thing, so I packed up and left. Eli felt silent. His eyes never left the water. When we got back to town, he exhaled slowly. Everyone kept asking who I was. Nathan frowned. What? My own mother? My uncle? The woman who lived next door my entire childhood? They looked at me like they'd never seen me before. Nathan stared. They didn't recognize you. Oh, Eli said quietly. They recognized my face. He looked directly into Nathan's eyes. They just couldn't remember my name. A breeze stirred the river. The rocking chair on the porch creaked gently. Nathan felt the hairs on the back of his neck raise. My brother remembered. For a while. What happened? The old man's shoulders slumped. He started forgetting things. Birthdays. Our parents. Where he lived. Little pieces at first. And then one morning, Eli stopped. His voice caught. He asked me if we ever met. Nathan said nothing. There was nothing to say. They found his boat 6 months later, floating near the same shell mound. No sign of him, only his camera. Nathan swallowed. The photographs? Eli nodded. They were all blank. Except the last one. Nathan already knew he didn't want to ask. He asked anyways. What was it? My brother. Nathan frowned. You said he disappeared. He had. The photograph showed him standing near the shell mound, smiling, like he never wanted to leave. The silence that followed felt impossibly heavy. Finally, Nathan whispered, Why tell me this now? The old man looked back, almost surprised by the question. Because. He gestured towards Nathan's camera bag. It has already started. Nathan slowly unzipped the bag. His camera rested exactly where he left it. The shells from beneath the gumbo limbo tree side and side. His breath caught. He was certain he never touched it. Very carefully, he lifted it into the light. The shell gleamed like a polished pearl, warm, almost alive. I didn't. No, you didn't bring it. The island did. Nathan tried to set it back inside the bag. His fingers refused to open. The shell felt impossibly difficult to release. Not physically, emotionally, like putting down something precious he owned all his life. He finally forced himself to let go. The moment it left his hand, he couldn't remember why he picked it up. For one strange heartbeat, he wasn't even certain where it had come from. Then the memory rushed back, and he stepped away from the bag. What is happening to me? It's learning you. Nathan stared. The first thing it takes isn't your body. It isn't your soul. It isn't even your memories. The old fisherman spoke with heartbreaking certainty. It learns your name. It learns your voice. It learns the way you laugh. The stories your grandmother told you. The smell of your childhood home after rain. The sound of your father's footsteps. It gathers ever a little piece that makes you, you. Nathan felt suddenly cold. And then, it waits. Waits for what? For enough of you. Nathan shook his head. I don't understand. You don't have to. You just have to leave. Nathan almost laughed. I've been trying to leave. I know. The hard part isn't steering the boat. Eli looked at him with deep sympathy. The hard part is convincing the island you're gone. At that moment, a little orange tabby beneath the rocking chair stood abruptly, its ears flattened, its back arched. The cat stared across the river towards the mangrove. A low growl rumbled in its throat. Nathan turned. The water was calm. Nothing moved. Then, one by one, every gull along the shoreline took flight. Hundreds of white wings exploded into the sky all at once. Not a single bird flew towards the island. Every one of them flew inland, away. It's coming with us. Nathan followed its gaze across the shimmering water, just where the river disappeared into the green maze of mangroves. Someone stood, too distant to recognize, too still to mistake for a tree, watching the marina, watching the bait shop, watching them. Nathan raised his binoculars with trembling hands. The figure sharpened into view. His breath stopped. The person standing at the edge of the mangroves was wearing his clothes. His faded green fishing shirt, his wide-brimmed hat, even this camera strap across his chest exactly as he did. It stood perfectly motionless. His face hidden in the shadows. Then, very slowly, he lifted one hand, not in greeting, not in warning. It simply reached up and removed the hat. Nathan stared into a face that looked exactly like his own. Only the eyes were impossibly old. Eli didn't need the binoculars. He never looked. Instead, he closed his eyes. I was afraid of that. Nathan lowered the glasses. What is it? Old fisherman answered in a voice barely louder than the tide. It knows who you are. There are people in Florida who swear the swamp creates doubles. Not the sort you see in mirrors. Those are honest. They show every wrinkle, every scar, every sleepless night you've earned. The doubles in the old stories are quieter than that. They don't appear to frighten you. They appear to replace you. An old woman once told me that if you ever see yourself standing where you know you are not, you must never call out. Because if it answers, one of you no longer belongs to this world. I laughed when she told me that. She didn't. Some stories are meant to entertain, and some are meant to keep you alive. Nathan lowered his binoculars so quickly they struck his chest. His own face stared back from his memory now, burned into his thoughts with impossible clarity. Not almost his face, not someone merely resembling him. Every freckle, every strand of wind-blown hair, even the faded scar above his eyebrow from falling off his bicycle when he was 9 years old. a scar no stranger could possibly know exists. His voice came out a little more than a whisper. That's me. It looks like you. There's a difference. The figure remained perfectly still at the edge of the mangroves. The distance between them was too great to make out details without the binoculars, yet Nathan felt those ancient eyes fixed upon him, watching, learning, waiting. The afternoon breeze carried the scent of salt across the river. The figure never moved, not even when the palms swayed around it. It seemed untouched by the wind, untouched by the world itself. We need to leave. Nathan looked at the truck parked beside the bake shop. I'll drive. Eli shook his head. It doesn't work like that. What doesn't? You can't outrun a place that's already inside your memory. Nathan stared at him. The shell. You still have it? Nathan's stomach dropped. He opened his bag, and the smooth white shell rested exactly where he left it, its polished surface shimmering in the afternoon light. For just a moment, he thought he saw tiny ripples moving beneath its surface, like moonlight dancing on still water. But when he blinked, they were gone. Throw it in the river. Nathan did not hesitate. He snatched up the shell and hurled it as hard as he could. It flashed white, though the sun before disappearing into the dark waters with a soft plunk. Both men watched the widening circle spread across the river. Neither of them spoke. The ripples faded, and the current resumed its gentle rhythm. Nathan exhaled. There. Eli's expression didn't change. Open your bag. Nathan frowned. It's gone. Open it. Slowly, he unzipped the camera bag once more. The shell rested inside, dry, perfectly clean, as though it had never left. Nathan stumbled backwards. No. His voice cracked. No, I threw it. I watched it sink. Nathan stared at the shell. It almost seemed harmless. Beautiful, even. He found himself wanting to pick it up again, to admire its delicate spiral, to rub his thumb across the smooth surface. Eli quietly zipped the bag closed before Nathan could reach inside. Don't touch it again. The orange tabby let out a sharp cry. Both men turned, and the figure across the river had moved. Only a single step. But it moved. Now it was closer to the shoreline. The water between them glimmered beneath the lowering sun. Nathan reached instinctively for his binoculars, but the old fisherman caught his wrist. Don't. I have to know. You already do. Nathan hesitated, then slowly lowered his hand. You said it learns people. What happens when it finishes? The old man looked towards the horizon, where the towering summer clouds were beginning to gather over the Gulf. My grandfather used to say, he paused, that the islands never wanted bodies. Nathan listened. They wanted witnesses. Witnesses? Someone to remember. When the village disappears, his eyes remain fixed on the distant mangroves. Their stories almost disappear too. The land remembers. The water remembers. The shells remember. But memory fades. Nathan frowns. What does that have to do with? He stops. The answer settles over him before he can get his answer. It borrows ours. Nathan's throat tightens. So it isn't trying to kill me. No. That would have been kinder. A long silence stretched between them. The marina had begun to empty. Tour boats returned from afternoon excursions. Families loaded coolers into pickup trucks. Children laughed as they chased gulls across the docks. And life continued. Ordinary. Completely unaware that just across the river, something impossible stood watching. Nathan wanted to shout, to warn them. But what would he say? Don't look towards the mangroves? Don't trust anyone that looks exactly like you? He imagined the expressions: concern, pity. Perhaps someone would call an ambulance or a sheriff. I've tried telling people. The old man gave a weary smile. They thought I'd been in the sun too long. A charter captain walked down, carrying a bucket of bait. Good afternoon, Eli. Eli nodded politely. Catch anything? Enough to keep my wife happy. The man laughed and then noticed Nathan. You all right, son? You look pale. Nathan opened his mouth. Before he could answer, the captain glanced towards the opposite bank. His smile faded. Oh, you waiting on somebody? Nathan's blood ran cold. You can see someone? The captain squinted, huh? He scratched his beard. Thought I did. Shook his head. Must have been one of those old cypress stumps. He continued towards his boat without another thought. Nathan and Eli exchanged a look. It doesn't show itself in the same way to everyone, he muttered. Clouds rolled over the sun. The light softened. Nathan looked at his watch. 4:38, and the sunset was still hours away. Yet the shadow stretched across the marina looked like evening. The river darkened. The breeze cooled. Somewhere nearby, the wind chime began ringing through the air. It's become perfectly still. One clear note, then another, then silence. Eli suddenly straightened. It's early. What is? The tide. Nathan looked towards the pilings. Water was rushing inland. Fast. Much faster than any normal incoming tide. Within moments, the dock had sat well above the surface, now floats only inches above the river. Loose ropes strained against the cleats. Boats rocked unnecessarily. Around them, people laughed and pointed. King tide, someone shouted. Another replied, never seen it coming this quick. Only Eli looked frightened. It's calling. Nathan barely heard him. What? The water. Eli's eyes never left the river. It wants us back. Without warning, Nathan's camera clicked once, twice, 3 times. Still zipped inside his bag. He slowly opened it, and the camera screen glowed. A new photograph appeared. Neither man had taken it. It showed a marina from above, as though someone were looking down from the top from a very tall tree. Tiny boats, tiny people, and the 2 men standing on the dock, and behind them, something else. A crowd. Dozens upon dozens of silent figures standing ankle deep in the river. They surrounded the marina, watching. None of the living people seemed aware of them. Children ran directly through them. Boats drifted across their reflections. The figures remained motionless, patient, like people waiting outside church before the doors open. Nathan slowly enlarged the image. The first row came into focus. Men, women, children, some dressed in woven garments, other in fishing garb from decades past. A young soldier in old military uniform, a woman in a dress that looked straight out of the 50s, an early couple holding hands. Different eras, different lives, all standing together. Then Nathan noticed one of the faces near the center. His own. Not the figure across the river. Him, standing among them, looking directly at the camera, smiling. He dropped the camera. It struck the dock with a hollow crack. The screen went black, and when he picked it up again, the photograph was gone. A voice drifted across the water. Soft, familiar. Nathan. He froze. His mother sounded exactly like his mother. She had been gone for 12 years. Nathan. The voice came again. Gentle, warm, loving. The way she used to call him inside when supper was ready. His eyes filled instantly. Without thinking, he stepped towards the edge of the dock. Eli grabbed his shoulders with surprising strength. Don't answer. Nathan's lips trembled. That's my mom. No. Eli's grip tightened. That's what it learned first. The voice called again, clear now, not from across the river, from just beneath the dock. Nathan. The water lapped softly against the pilings, and he found himself leaning forward, wanting more than anything to look beneath the dock, to see her, to hear her laugh one more time. Eli pulled him back, hard. Nathan stumbled. Anger flashed across his face. Let me go. Eli's blue eyes filled with tears. If she loves you, he whispered, she wouldn't ask you to follow. The voice fell silent. The river became still. Even the quick rising time seemed to pause. Across the water, the figure wearing Nathan's face slowly placed the wide brim hat back onto his head. Then, with a movement so natural it was almost ordinary, it smiled. Not a cruel one, not a hungry one. A smile of recognition, as though it finally knew exactly who it was becoming. And for the first time since this story began, and turned away from the white shell island, it took one step inland, toward the town. Nathan whispered, almost too softly to hear, "It's leaving." Eli closed his eyes. No. When he opened them again, they were filled with quiet resignation. It doesn't have to. He looked at Nathan. It already knows the way home. There is an old belief that every place has a heart. A mountain keeps it in stone. A river keeps it in the current. The sea keeps it in the tide. And perhaps an old shell mound keeps its heart beneath a layer upon layers of forgotten years. If that's true, then the hearts can break. The broken things have a way of reaching anyone who's willing to listen. Perhaps that's all that this story has ever been. Not a haunting, not a curse. only something very old, desperately afraid of being forgotten. But even the loneliest memories can become dangerous when it refuses to let go. Nathan didn't remember deciding to leave the marina. One moment, he was standing beside Eli, staring across the river towards the place where his double had disappeared. The next, he was climbing into the skiff once again. The engine rumbled softly beneath his hands. Behind him, Eli untied the rope in silence. Neither man spoke until the dock had faded into the distance. Finally, Nathan asked the question he had been avoiding. Can it be stopped? I don't know. You've never tried? The old fisherman smiled sadly. I spent 30 years trying. The afternoon had grown strangely dim. Storm clouds towered over the gulf, yet no thunder followed. The air felt heavy, waiting. Even the water had changed. Instead of reflecting the sky, it reflected shadows. Nathan caught himself glancing over the side every few moments. More than once, he thought he saw his face beneath the surface, looking up, not reaching, simply watching the boat pass overhead. Each time he blinked, they were gone. Neither the GPS nor the chart mattered anymore. The channel seemed to find them. Without speaking, they pointed the boat towards the narrow passage between two dense walls of mangroves. Nathan had never noticed it before. The opening looked too small for the skiff, yet, as they approached, the branches slowly drift apart. Just enough. The boat slipped through. Behind them, the mangroves closed against the whisper of the leaves. Nathan looked back, and the entrance had vanished. Only an unbroken wall of green remained. I have never seen this channel. You weren't supposed to. It only opens when the island is ready. The tunnel twisted through the mangroves for what it felt like hours. No breeze reached them. No birds nested overhead. No insects buzzed beneath the canopy. Only a steady puttering of the outboard echoed between ancient roots. Then the engine died. Not sputtered, not coughed. It simply stopped. Nathan turned the key. Nothing. Again, silence. Eli calmly lifted the motor from the water. The propeller was clear. No fuel problem, Nathan whispered. No. Eli rested one hand on the gunwale. It wants us to walk. The shell island waited beyond the tunnel, exactly as before, and yet completely different. Smoke drifted lazily above the trees. Nathan could hear laughter, children calling one another, the rhythmic tap of someone carving wood, dogs barking somewhere beyond the mound. His heart leapt. The island was alive. And then he took a look closer. The smoke never rose. It remained perfectly still. The laughter repeated the same three notes again and again and again, like an old record with a scratch. Nothing there was truly living. It was only remembering. They stepped ashore, and the shells answered beneath their feet. This time, another sound answered them. Hundreds of footsteps. Soft, gentle, hidden somewhere inside the mound itself. not approaching, not retreating, simply walking, as though countless unseen people continued about lives uninterrupted centuries before. Nathan closed his eyes. For just a moment, he could almost imagine the village exactly as it once been. The smell of fresh fish cooking over fire, children chasing one another between homes, women weaving baskets beneath the shade of towering trees, the sounds of paddles returning at sunset. Not ghosts, memories, held together by a place that refused to let them disappear. The tree. It'll be waitin'. The gumbo limbo stood exactly where Nathan remembered. Copper bark peeled gently beneath the humid air. At its roots rested a shallow depression surrounded by carefully arranged shells. The shells he had thrown into the river. The shell that somehow returned. Now rested in the center, waiting. Nathan stared at it. It seemed smaller somehow, almost ordinary, until he realized it was beating. Not visibly, but he could hear it. A slow, steady rhythm, like a distant heartbeat beating beneath the earth. I think, Nathan whispered, it's remembering. Nathan knelt. This time he picked up the shell. It felt warm, comforting. Instantly the world around him disappeared. He stood once more upon the island, but now it was whole. The village stretched before him beneath this brilliant Florida sun. Children ran laughing through open spaces. Fishermen pulled canoes onto shore. An old woman sang while grinding shells into powder. The air smelled of smoke, salt, and blooming sea grapes. No one seemed frightened. No one seemed haunted. They simply were living. A little girl noticed him. She smiled. She couldn't have been more of 8 years old. She walked over holding a tiny shell necklace in her hand. Without speaking, she placed it gently onto Nathan's palm. Then she looked towards the western horizon. Nathan followed her gaze. Dark sails. European ships. Tiny against the sea. The little girl's smile faded, not into fear, into sadness, as though she already knew what those ships carried with them. Disease, violence, loss, time. The village slowly dissolved like mists beneath the morning sun. One by one, the people faded, not because they had died, because history had moved on without them. Only the little girl remained. She looked at Nathan with eyes far older than any child should possess. And then she whispered one word. Remember. Nathan gasped as the vision released him. He found himself once again beneath the gumbo limbo, tears streaming down his face. The shell lay open in his hand. Its spiral cracked clean through. Eli looked at him quietly. You saw them. Nathan nodded. They weren't... He struggled to speak. They weren't trying to hurt anyone. No. They were not trying to disappear. The ground trembled, not violently, like a deep sigh rising through the shell mound. And then the whispering voices returned. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Not pleading, not threatening, singing a farewell, slow, gentle, filled with aching beauty of something finally ready to rest. The shell in Nathan's hands grew lighter until it crumbled, not shattered, simply became fine white sand. The breeze carried it upward across the mound, into the mangroves, towards the sea. For the first time, birds landed on the island. A single mockingbird settled upon the gumbo limbo, and then another. An osprey circled overhead. Dragonflies skimmed the clearing. The forest exhaled and life returned, not dramatically, quietly, as though it had been waiting just beyond sight. Nathan turned towards the shoreline, and the figure wearing his face stood there, watching for a long moment. Neither of them moved. Then, the double smiled, not with triumph, with gratitude. Its outline shivered in the afternoon light. The borrowed face slowly softened, changed, becoming older, then younger, then someone else entirely. Faces flickered across like reflections upon moving water. A fisherman, a child, a soldier, an elderly woman, a young mother. Hundreds, thousands. Every person the island had ever struggled to remember. Finally, there was no face at all. Only sunlight. Only mist. Only empty shoreline. The figure dissolved into the breeze. Gone. The two men looked at each other. The old fisherman seemed somehow lighter. The deep weariness that had lived in his eyes for decades had softened. He smiled a real smile this time. I'd forgotten my brother's laugh. Nathan blinked. He continued to laugh quietly. I remembered it just now. A tear slipped down his cheek. I haven't heard it in 30 years. They left the island as evening settled over the 10,000 islands. This time the birds sang. The channels matched the charts. The GPS worked without complaint. And the tide carried them home. No fog, no footsteps. Only the ordinary sound of Florida returning to themselves. Years passed. Nathan never published those photographs. When he finally reviewed the memory card, every single image of the island had vanished. There were pictures of the spoonbills, mangroves, sunsets, even the old bait shop. But every photograph taken on the mound itself was nothing more than a soft white light. People accused him of accidentally overexposing the film. He never argued. Some things don't need proof, only respect. The old bait shop still stands, or so I've been told. The orange tabby still naps beneath the rocking chair. Tourists still stop for bait and ice cream before heading to the islands. If you ask the old fisherman whether there are shell mounds worth photographing, he'll smile politely, and then he'll unfold a weathered paper chart. His fingers will stop over a blank stretch of water, and he'll say only this: stay in these channels. If you ask why, he'll look towards the mangroves, smile a little sadly, and answer, some places have already been remembered enough. So, if you ever find yourself wandering the 10,000 islands and your GPS loses its way, listen. If the birds suddenly fall silent, turn back. If you hear footsteps where there should only be water, do not answer them. And if by some strange chance you come across a white shell hill rising from the mangroves where no map says one should be, walk gently, speak softly, leave nothing behind you, take nothing with you. Because beneath every shell, there is a story. And stories, dear heart, deserve to be remembered. But they do not always wish to be carried home. The candle is burning low now, and the swamp has grown quiet. If you're still awake, there's always another story waiting for you here. Sleep well, and I'll be right here when you